Thank you very much for being here this early morning of SEPA. I am Danae Hudson, and I'm here with my colleague Jane Halonen, and we're going to be talking to you today about APA's Introductory Psychology Initiative. We're going to look a little bit back at the past. This seems really loud. The history of IPI, kind of where we are and where we hope to go in the future. See if this works. There we go. So here are the goals for today. First of all, we want to share some conclusions from APA's national effort to redefine and transform introductory psychology. We want to reinforce skill development in addition to content coverage. And we want to share some assignments, some example assignments that would promote active learning that use the principles that we put forward in IPI. But first, before we do that, I have an important question. Does anyone in here like to bake? Lots of people. What do you like to bake?
I do breads, different types of breads.
Okay, this is good. Someone else? What do you like to bake? Brownies. Awesome. Well, if you don't like to bake, who likes to eat baked goods? Most people, that's great. So I wanted to introduce you to my daughter, Sylvie. I have 3 kids. She's my middle child. And when Sylvie was 8, she really fell in love with baking. So it started with cupcakes. Wow. Hello, Missy. So she was 8 when she fell in love with baking, and she started baking cupcakes and cookies and things like that. And then when she was 12, we had this thing called COVID happen, and we were all locked down together in our house, and we were looking for things to do. And so she decided, I really want to do something challenging. I think I want to learn how to make croissants. And I said, well, this is way out of my league. So she researched on her own, and she signed up for an online class on how to learn how to bake croissants. And she did this online class while we were in lockdown. And that, surprisingly, is actually her first batch of croissants that she made, which is pretty phenomenal. And so through that process, Sylvie really started to recognize and understand that baking is both an art and a science, right? So, she had to have all the ingredients. She could gather all of those, but she really needed to have the skill that she got from the class to make laminated dough, right? Which is quite an ordeal. And over time, it took her about a year to kind of really get this together to make, those look great, but there were like little problems along the way. And it took about a year for her to create this product that was amazing and ultimately looks like this. So she has a little business, Perfect Pastries. You can check it out on Facebook. And she sells to the neighborhood and people in our town and things like that. And she bakes all kinds of things, but she enjoys baking croissants. And so she recognized that there were many, many parts to this, right? There's the content, right? There's the actual ingredients. There's the skill that she needed. But one of the problems that she was having is that a lot of times she would pull them out of the oven, and some of them were perfect like that, and some weren't. They didn't look like that. They didn't have the flaky inside, and they seemed to be too brown on top. And so we started having a discussion about, despite the fact that the oven says that it's 375, the entire oven is not 375 all the time. It's not that consistent. And so what could you do to actually try to figure out how to get these perfectly? So she researched and found that the exact temperature of croissants on the inside, I think it needs to be 204. I can't remember that part, but she researched it and found out and decided that she needed to use a reliable and valid assessment instrument to actually check the croissants. So she started using a thermometer, and she would actually check the temperature of each croissant before she pulled it out. And what she realized is they have to come out at different times. So by using this reliable and valid instrument to measure this, she was able to create the perfect croissant. So what does this have to do with introductory psychology? Well, teaching is both an art and a science. Right? So you have to have your content, you have to have skills, that you personally have and that you can teach. And then you also have to have some reliable and valid assessment instruments to actually be able to measure, are you doing what you think you're doing? So there's actually a lot of commonality between intro psych and croissants. So the Introductory Psychology Initiative was made up of 22 people who were really invested, teachers who were invested in teaching intro psych. And this group, here we go, is right here. Some of these people you will recognize. And really, these were people who were just really invested in the course and wanted to be part of doing something, furthering the work that actually started back in 2008. Right? So the roots of this reached back all the way to then, and then culminated in kind of a seminal paper in 2016, which was strengthening the common core of intro psych. And that was published in the American Psychologist. And then we came together as a group and said, we want to take this even further. And we were organized into 4 working groups. So these were the 4 groups. So we had student learning outcomes and assessments, and integrative themes as part of that. I was part of the course models and design group. There's a teacher training group and also a student success and transformation. So we worked, starting in about 2018, for a good 3 years or so. And we were led by Garth Neufeld, who's here in the front, and also Regan Gurung. And we did a number of different things. And one of the things that a subgroup of us did is actually do what we call an introductory psychology census. So some of you may have even been part of that, where you filled out a questionnaire. And it was really kind of like taking the state of where is intro psych right now. And we were able to gather a lot of data from over 800 psychology professors who taught intro psych and publish that in a paper in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology. And that was really kind of being able to aggregate a lot of data of getting the sense of where are we right now and what are we doing in this course. And then these working groups work together, like I said, for about 3 years. And in the end, that culminated in this published book in 2021 that obviously involved a lot of people. And I think that book is a great summary of this 3 years of work. And I think it has a lot of practical advice in terms of what we found and what some of the recommendations are. And one of the people who was really instrumental in developing the student learning outcomes and assessment is to my left here, and that is Jane Halonen. So I'm going to pass it over to her right now to talk a little bit about really some of the basic background and what her group did and what they've discovered and some recommendations of how to take that and apply it in your own courses.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. This feels like I'm sitting in the middle of the Grand Canyon talking to you, so we appreciate it that you were able to move up for us. I also want to point out that Danae and I didn't plan to look like we dressed in a coordinated fashion, but it looks like we're part of a cult.
You are.
It's the uniform.
It's a little weird. Okay, so I wanted to share with you the working assumptions that we had in the work that we did, especially in connection with the outcomes group. The outcomes group was a very interesting set of humans, 2 wonderful coordinators and 3 rowdy personalities that they had to manage throughout, and we were still able to deliver the goods in the end. What we said for working conceptions is that we wanted to make sure that we addressed what was in common across different kinds of formats. We wanted to encourage people to start thinking about intro psych as an opportunity to develop academic skills for students, not just focus so much on what does the axon do, not just content focus. We wanted specifically not to end up saying, and this is the way you should teach intro. Because what we know from working with a variety of really talented teachers from high school through universities is that great teachers put their thumbprints on the design of an intro class, and we didn't want to interfere with that creative process. We just wanted to provide some guidance about trying to move people into a place where they could be more comfortable, focusing on skill for all the reasons that that's important, This is a particular mission for me because most students who take Psychology 101, that's the only course they take. And in effect, they become ambassadors to the public, which for the most part doesn't have a clue who we are or what we do. And so if we do a good job in intro, then students can become ambassadors for us in helping to correct a lot of the misconceptions that are out there. We also wanted purposefully to look at the prior work that had been done in this arena, and that includes a lot of work, and a lot of this work is personal to me because for some reason APA thinks that I am outcomes are us, and comes to me with every project that they have that is outcome focused, and I usually say yes if they ask me nicely to participate. So right now, just as one example, we are in the throes of the final stages of approval for Guidelines 3.0. If you are familiar with Guidelines 2.0, good, because it's about to change, and APA does require us to change it once every 10 years to make sure that we're doing good current practice, so that'll be coming in August. But lots of really good work. We wanted to make sure that we recognized prior work. And in terms of assessment, I know I'm a rare bird, but I love assessment. I think it's a great tool for understanding whether or not we're being effective in what we do. And I worry a little bit that the way it has been construed in higher education creates an ordeal for people, that assessment is an add-on, that most faculty hate it. They refer to it as the A word. But when it's really done properly as a tool to help improve things, it can improve things. And as psychologists, we should be interested in the evidence of effectiveness for our claims about what we say we're doing. So our strategies in looking at the outcomes, we wanted to make sure that we were emphasizing active learning strategies, and sometimes that's referred to as authentic assessment, over traditional multiple choice. We can, if we're teachers, we can all give multiple choice tests. We're good at it. But the fact is, we also know enough about cognitive psych to know that that's not knowledge that's going to last. What's going to last is when we give students things that they have to grapple with, that they have to experience. We want to make learning and assessing both transformative, that's a huge aspirational goal, and we want it to stick. We want the learning to be memorable. And then a lesson that one of my early career mentors taught me is, the thing about assessment is that it doesn't ever settle down, that it's a continuous feedback loop that will help you refine over time what you're doing. And so once you get your arms around that notion that it won't settle down, you'll be a lot happier and you won't have to refer to it as the A word. So what I wanted to do is share with you the outcomes that the woolly mammoths, that's what we named ourselves, and I'll be damned if I can remember why we called ourselves the woolly mammoths. We decided that we wanted to simplify introductory outcomes to focus on the things that we thought would be, most important for students, whether they're pursuing a major or whether this is going to be their only shot. And so there are basically three categories. Psychology content, and you can read there. I'm going to give you some examples of each of those, so I'm not going to list them out for you now. And the primary focus, the thing that I think is most valuable about intro, is helping students understand the importance of finding evidence to support what you believe. And so scientific thinking is the way that we manage that with the outcomes that are listed there. Then probably the thing that has captured most public attention in the work that the mammoths did was to say, what is it that we expect students to be able to remember fondly about the course well after it's over? What are the themes that will persist? What seems to show up in multiple places in content? And we came up with these themes. And I think of all of them, I'm going to just highlight that my favorite one is our perceptions and biases filter our experiences of the world through an imperfect lens. Because I remember when I took introductory psychology and I was trying to decide, this seems like a kind of cool major. Then we studied defense mechanisms. It's like, is that cool that everybody lies to themselves? Even me. Wait, even me? I lie to myself. There was something just magical about that concept for me. And so that particular notion is one that I really stress as a theme when I'm teaching introductory psychology. So, if we're about transformation, that we want Intro to transform how students think about the world and how they think about behavior, we have a couple options. I'm going to do the toe in the water approach, which is if you're not interested in complete renovation of your course, if you're not thinking necessarily about, oh, I'm going to grab one of those themes and completely redesign my class, I'm going to go through the outcomes and give you some examples that have been created by many teachers, not just me, and the projects themselves can be found in details with rubrics and evidence in project assessment that APA runs. So the toe in the water approach. So let me start with one of my favorite ones. If we're going to identify concepts and research findings, a brilliant high school teacher named Steve Jones came up with the zombie restaurant, where you put students in groups and say, you're now owning a zombie restaurant, I want you to come up with the name of the restaurant and the dishes that zombies would benefit from by eating parts of the human body. I have never seen intro students more excited about a task than the zombie restaurant. Now, an addition is if you have them do it graphically, you can take everything that they've created and post it in your department so it becomes an interesting point of focus, and it helps us make teaching transparent, which I think is really important. Second, we want students to be able to interpret research findings related to psychological concepts. And so what you see here is confidence in scientists is directly related to the likelihood of the coronavirus vaccine. It doesn't matter what data set you choose, but the point is in intro, let's haul in some data sets and have students mess with them. Let's have them figure out what concepts are we trying to apply here? What's the construct behind the research that's going on there? For, Oh, there we go. There we go. Thank you. Pointing out the green button. Lou, I did avoid the black button because I do understand the world will explode if I hit the black button. Okay, so 1.3, you're applying psychological principles to personal and other aspects of life. And again, one of our contributors to project assessment just said, I want you to come up with 10 examples that cut across 6 chapters, find things that are in common that you can state may have transformed your life, so that self-assessment piece then can reinforce the goals that we're not just teaching them concepts, we want the concepts to be truly meaningful for them. For next, describe the advantages and limitations of research strategies. We want to know about, here's a problem. Come up with something that students care about or faculty care about and have them brainstorm how would you answer that question? Or can we do a case study, a survey? What are the advantages and disadvantages of both? And usually if you pick a topic that students care about, that can produce very passionate discussion, and I highly recommend parking. Okay, so evaluate, design, or conduct psychological research. You may find that a kind of an interesting admixture, but one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we addressed is the fact that introductory psychology is sometimes taught in contexts where people really don't have the capacity to conduct research, but they should be able to determine if a research design is good. So again, pick any topic that generates concern, loneliness, faculty rigidity about deadlines, that's also a good one, and ask students to design a survey. They don't have to conduct it, but can they show you the principles that we would expect to see in good research design? Draw logical and objective conclusions about behavior from an empirical stand. In this case, another very talented high school teacher, Maria Vieta, said, pretend, now that you've studied the sleep chapter, pretend you're a consultant and give advice to your friend who's having trouble. See if you can decode and figure out some other strategies from what you've learned. Here's one that comes from my home turf, and that is evaluate how psychological science can be used to challenge misconceptions. On the APA project assessment website, there's a simple pre-post test that you can administer first day of class. What do you really believe? And of course, this is a place where you can introduce one of the hardy weeds in psychology's garden, which is learning styles. Students want to tell you that they, please design everything because I am a visual learner, and we know that the research does not support doing that. And so you can early on begin to deconstruct those myths. Now we turn to the integrating themes. And in this case, each of these themes, I think, have differential appeal to people. And for some individuals, they like all the themes and want to figure out how to introduce that in any juncture in the course. And some people like to select specific themes and focus on it that way. But here's what we think we want students to remember over time, that psychology doesn't sit still. That here's the book, this is what we know today, here's going to be the book in another couple of years when we know even more, that we're going to change our positions as the data inform us to do that. So looking at specific things where psychology's changed its mind, like stress-induced ulcers, is a good idea to reinforce that it isn't scientists being whimsical, it is that we're responding to data as the data change. The next theme is psychology explains general principles that address behavior, but also recognize individual differences. Now, why this is important is when you're speaking about the phenomena that we study from group research in psychology, you've probably had the experience that a student will say, well, that's not my experience. And for many students, they say, so that must be invalid. And our task is to be able to say, no, this is what we look at from the group. And my dear, you might be an outlier. So let's teach you that little notion that you may not fit with the group trend, but in general, we can accommodate both individual differences and group trends. Theme C, that psychological, biological, social, and cultural factors influence behavior. And here we borrow from Nin Nguyen Littleford, who suggests that can we think of some cultural situation, put people in a creative situation and let them kind of think through what are all the factors. This is probably the place where I think we have the biggest impact with students who come to us wanting things to be simple. I have to say, they share, faculty are like that too. They want simple answers to things. My favorite example is the student who came to me and said, my 5-year-old niece still sucks her thumb. Why does she do that? Yeah. Let's count the ways. Let's figure out what are the where are all the elements. And so by the end of the intro class, I want my students to be comfortable with the fact that A, we don't know, and B, it depends on, and C, isn't this fun to talk about? That's sort of the goal. D, psychology values diversity, promotes equity, and fosters inclusion. And you'd probably have to be asleep over the past couple of years not to recognize that this has become a pressing value for APA. But the example that we give here in project assessment is one from Sue Boatwright-Horwitz, who does a pre-post test on racism, and in fact is one of those individuals who coordinates the intro course around the theme of social justice. Well, here comes mine. Perceptions and biases filter our experiences of the world through an imperfect lens. I love bringing in one of those Rorschach slides or a projective slide and say, okay, where are my volunteers? And what do you see here? And let's talk about what could be going into the differences that people are bringing to this experience. And oh, by the way, what do we think about Rorschach after the end of this? Are we convinced that this is a good way to go about doing good mental health care? For theme F, apply psychological principles that can change lives, organizations, and communities. Many people in intro psych see this as a perfect opportunity to do service learning, that you can take groups of students into the community and have them observe children in daycare settings and try to figure out how to reduce bullying. You can ask them to take on a behavior modification project where they try to modify their own behavior. We want them to understand we're giving them practical tools in intro psych, and especially the ones who get excited about defense mechanisms, we want them to join us and become good psych majors. Well, the last of the integrative themes is really super important because, thanks to our friends Milgram and Zimbardo, students often come away from psychology thinking that social psychology in particular is the place where miscreants go to grow old, And we really want students to understand that psychology has ethical controls in place to help both in the delivery of treatment and also in the protection of clients. And so one of the examples here is turn them into an IRB and ask whether or not we should replicate the Stanford prison study with only women students. And so that can produce some very interesting discussion. It can also introduce the reality that chances are good that wouldn't fly if the ethics portion has been taught well. But now notice, as a kind of concluding comment for my portion, it doesn't matter how extensive you are in what you do to make the learning more memorable, but the idea is you want students, when they meet you in a drugstore or a grocery store later in life, to be able to say to you, here's the meaningful thing that you taught me, as opposed to some goofy story that made no sense, that was, you said it off the top of your head, that was disconnected from, you had one of those flights, one of those moments. You want students to be able to remember things that potentially transform. And so starting with a toe in the water is one way to do it, and now Danae's going to talk about some thematic perspectives.
Okay, so we talked about kind of the toe in the water approach, and then a lot of people now, since IPI came out, are talking about really, let's do this dramatic overhaul and teach psychology all according to these themes. Now, the first thing is, this is not new, right? It is not a new approach to teach thematically. A lot of people have done this and written about this. The themes themselves might be a little bit different than what we proposed in IPI. And I think that that is a fine approach if that is something that works for you. One of the things to keep in mind is that, A, it's a lot of work to completely transform your course, especially if you were very content-driven prior, and then say, now I'm going to teach according to these themes. So if you have a sabbatical, great. That might be the thing you want to do. And the reality is you don't have to do all of that, right? You don't have to, this is not all or none, right? So now we can talk about cognitive distortions. And we don't have to do 100% turnaround in our course. We can do small things. And so you don't have to go completely to teaching thematically. And some of the examples I'll show you in a little bit are some of the approaches I have taken, what I would consider more of like a hybrid approach. But some people are really interested in this, and people ask me all the time, are textbooks going to be different now? Or are they going to be, organized by themes? And the reality is I think that would be really hard. So when you think about these integrative themes, one of the things that's wonderful about them is that they're very broad and they span the content of our course. So if you were to pick this theme, a particular theme, the bias theme, what chapters of a typical textbook would you think would be part of that theme? All of them? Right? So once you start thinking about this thematically, it's not so easy to identify the theme and say, well, this is the chapter of content that fits with that theme. And in some ways, that's what we're trying to move away from, because we've talked for a long time about not teaching in terms of silos, right? In terms of content. This is chapter 1. Now we're going to talk about chapter 2 and the idea that those are not even related at all. And so what we don't want to do is now fall into this siloed theme approach where first we're going to teach about this theme and then we're going to teach about this theme. The idea of themes is that they integrate the content throughout the course and that these themes can be woven through what we talk about. And in many ways, I think about the themes as the connectors, right? They're the connectors of the content. And they help students to see that really psychology isn't chapter 1 to 16, right? That there's really this common thread that goes through a lot of what we're talking about. And this is just one of the ways we're choosing to break that up. So if you are thinking about doing some kind of course changes, I'm sure most of you have heard of this or familiar with this, but I would just sort of encourage you to think about a backward design. So whenever you're going about whether you're going to do your toe in the water or you're going to look at different thematic approaches, the standard approach that a lot of people take, right, is they get all the stuff, they make their syllabus, and then they decide, what am I going to do? right? So everything's done. I choose my textbook first, then I write my syllabus, then I get my lectures planned out, and I got my PowerPoints and I'm ready. Okay, like, oh, I got to make an exam. Okay, what am I actually going to talk about here? Which really is kind of the incorrect approach. What we want to do is more of a backward design type of thing where you start from your learning goals, right? What is your goal for these students? And as you can see in what Jane already talked about, there are many different goals. There are many different ways to prioritize goals. We can't do it all in one course. So I would encourage you to pick the goals that resonate most with you. And that when you do that, you will have a way of bringing the beauty of psychology out to your students so that they really can leave your course with those one or two things that change their life, right? So if you work in a way that is really something that is passionate for you, and you develop your goals, you can then from those broad goals come up with specific learning objectives. Now we have them, luckily now, nationally for Intro Psych. And then you can design your assessments based on that because again, we need a reliable and valid way to measure are our croissants cooked, right? So we need to know, do our students actually know what we think they know? Because unfortunately, a lot of times as professors, we think, well, they should know that because I taught them that. But you ever got the exam scores back and you're like, how did they get that wrong? I basically told them before the test this was going to be on the test and they still said it was punishment, but it is negative reinforcement, right? So they don't always know as much as we think they know. And is that a reflection on them or is that a reflection on us? Or is it maybe a little of both? Right? So a backward design, you start from that and then you really kind of develop your learning activities as a way to kind of bring that content to life. And you have already developed a way that you're going to assess that. It's a much more student-centered approach. Now, even if you are thinking about organizing your course thematically, obviously we still have to have content of some sorts. And that kind of brings us to the issue of like, there is so much content in Intro Psych. And how do we go about dealing with that and organizing that? And you have probably seen this pillar model before. This is the revised pillar model that came out of the IPI work. So it's very similar. I'm going to use my little laser pointer. There we go. So this is all the same as the first iteration of this. And really the pillar approach, we could spend lots of time arguing about whether one thing should be in one pillar or not. I really don't like that sensation and perception are split up, but that's just me, right? It doesn't really matter. The idea is that we have these pillars that we can kind of organize our content. And in some ways, this is a theme, right? This is a thematic approach. And what the pillar approach says is that if you're going to be teaching Intro Psych, try to at least cover 2 topics from each pillar. And I think the beauty of this, the biggest thing that this pillar model has done for people is it has helped to free them from the content. So I've talked to so many people, even my friend Nolan sitting at the back, who is someone who before was like, I need to teach every single chapter. I got 16 chapters in this book. I got 16 weeks of the class. Well, there you go. Right? And you feel, part of you feel like the students buy this book. I should do this. Like this is my job. But when we know how much of the content students really remember later on, we have some data about that and it's not good. I think it's okay to scale back. And that's what this pillar model really did for people, is said it is okay. You don't have to cover all the chapters, all the material. So in my course, we do 12 chapters, right? And we make sure that there are at least 2 from each of these pillars. Some people kind of switch it out semester to semester. Sometimes they cover, if they don't cover motivation and emotion one semester, they might bring it in another semester. And that's a great way to do that too. The thing with the pillar model that I want to emphasize that has slightly changed to this iteration is that we've really emphasized, we've renovated the floor and the roof, basically. So research methods is really the bedrock or the foundation of everything we do. So when you think back to what Jane talked about in the learning outcomes, right? Science is the backbone of psychology. And that is a message we want to get through in everything that we do in talking to students, and that we've indicated here as being the floor of our house. And then the roof is our integrative themes. Right? And I think what's important about this visual is the idea that the themes can kind of cover and go around the content and ultimately drift down into all different pillars. Right? So the themes, again, are kind of like the connectors, the way of tying everything together. Okay. So I think you can use this as a guide in terms of how do you select of all of this information, what are you going to talk about in your course? Now, if you are going to start using integrative themes, the group together, and this is put on the APA website as well, gave some instructions about just some general kind of instructions. So make the themes explicit, right? In your course, don't just stick them in the syllabus and assume that the students are going to read that and be like, oh, these themes tie everything together, right? So you want to really make them explicit, make them a part of your course. You want to provide practice opportunities for thinking and communicating about integrative themes. Notice that these are very broad and open because we want to give you the flexibility to do that however fits best with your style and the course that you have and the student population that you have. And then you want to assess, right? Again, you're not going to assume just because we talk about these themes that students are really going to get it. They need the opportunity to practice. And then we want to assess, are they really understanding this and being able to use this in a way that's really that's meaningful in their life. So these are some general kinds of guidelines. So I mentioned that what I have done at this early point anyway is really kind of first taken my own advice, which is don't try to do anything too big, too fast. And I've kind of done a more hybrid approach. So I teach blended intro where I have 330 students. And then I teach a smaller online of like 40 students, a smaller online section. So this has been easier for me because I'm part of like really an intro psych teaching team at Missouri State. It's been easier for me to implement this in my online class just because it's just me and it's obviously way fewer students. So what I've done really is just been able to kind of work at the discussion board level. So before I used to do discussion boards about different things and, students ultimately, I think they have good reason probably to complain about discussion boards. I do think they can have a tendency to be kind of boring. I don't know about you, but I find it like I kind of dread when I have to grade them. Right? And so I think that tells us something, right? Like maybe whatever we're doing in those discussion boards somehow isn't resonating with them. And so my goal was, since I felt that way about discussion boards, maybe this is the area that I can focus on and try to bring in these themes as a way of connecting the content. And so I thought about, what are my goals? How am I going to assess that? How am I going to do that? I want to scaffold, right? How I introduce this content and not just kind of throw all these themes at them at the beginning of the course and now say do all these things with these themes because they don't actually have any of the content yet. So there are kind of multiple stages of what we did. The first thing is I just introduced the themes. I have students watch these great videos that Garth made, actually, about that really explain each of the themes, and you can search for those online, Garth Neufeld, and then he does a great job of explaining the themes and then also giving some real-life examples, like how would this show up in life, and I think that's really important for students, because that's really the piece for me personally that I want them to get. I want them to be able to see these themes out in the real world, right? How is psychology playing out all around them in everyday life? And so then their first discussion board, because we haven't gotten into much content, is really like, once you've watched all these videos, once you've read about these themes, which one really sparks your interest? What's the one that was like, oh, that sounds cool, right? So it's like, just pick one. And sometimes I have students write, it was hard for me to just pick one. And I'm like, you are now my favorite, right? And so which one kind of stands out to you? Describe that theme in your own words. How do you think that it might show up in psychology, right? Get into do some of this kind of preview work. Why does it interest you, right? So that's kind of their first discussion board. And then the next one, now this is not a best practices for a slide here, but I wanted to show you kind of what is all written out for my students. So this is their next iteration of what I would consider kind of the real discussion board question, right? So it gives them kind of the intro, right? We're making it explicit. There's 7 key themes described in the syllabus and in this course. Think about these themes as a way of tying our content together. So I repeat that over and over again, and so they can kind of get that idea. And so what I'm doing this semester is I am having them pick one theme and find evidence from it from 2 of the chapters that they have completed so far. And so I want them to really think about that theme and how they're seeing that play out in different types of content. So I'm being very explicit to them. I'm saying your response should describe the theme and include a clear and detailed discussion of each concept or idea from the chapter that relates to the theme. So they're connecting the information. Name the concept or idea, define it in your own words, and explain how the concept fits with the theme. So what I don't want them to do is write out, negative reinforcement is defined by the following, and word for word from the textbook. So I'm really saying you need to put this into your own words. I want you to think about it and how does this make sense for you? And then I want them to come up with an example of how you have or might see evidence of this key theme in real life. Right? This could be something from your personal experience. It could be something that you could imagine based on what you've learned about this concept and how it fits with the key theme. So there's really the connecting it to real life part. And this is a slight change from what I did the previous semester. So in the previous semester, I had them pick 2 chapters and find a theme in each. So I did 2 themes, because I wanted to be able, I wanted them to be able to kind of cover more themes that way, which was a fine approach. But what I found over the course of the semester, what I was missing is them seeing that these themes are woven throughout the chapters. So when they had to select a theme per chapter, I felt like they were starting to say, well, sensation and perception is that theme, E. And that's what I did not want. I wanted them to really see that many of these themes can come about in many chapters. And that's why I made that just a very small change this semester to say, no, pick one theme. Now they have 3 discussion boards to do over the course of the semester. So then the next time they do this, I say, you have to pick a different theme. You can't do the same theme that you did the first time. But you still now, since we've now read this many chapters, you have to pick one theme and talk about how it is shown in at least 2 of the chapters that we have done. And what I really like about this, to be honest, I still dread reading discussion boards. But once I get into it, have y'all had this experience where you're like, oh, that's so nice. Oh, that was a great example. Like, I'll find myself doing that. And then I'm like, why do I dread this all the time? So I have been amazed at some of their examples. I have also realized that this is a very difficult thing for them to do. So what I try to do now is I provide them with an example. So I didn't write all that here, but actually it's included in this when I put this up on their discussion board. I give them an example. I think this last time I wrote, because I had just read something in the news. I always try to find current things. So I said, oh, I just saw a story about how they're putting stationary bikes in classrooms now, in elementary school classrooms. And what they found, they did some research and they found that it really helps students stay on task and improve their academic performance because they had something to do and it was exercise. And I said, this is really interesting. This relates to this theme that psychology can improve our lives in important ways and have meaningful impacts on people's lives. They used research, a scientific method, to actually measure these results. And that this is happening right now. Like this is, I literally read that article that morning. And so I use that as an example and then connected that. And I said, this is something that we will talk about in the stress and health chapter, for example. This is the importance of exercise, the importance that exercise can have on your mood. You could relate it to the psychological disorders chapter if you want to talk about children who have ADHD, right? So things like that. So after doing that, I think that helps them to kind of model for them what I'm looking for in their answers. And I saw some really great things. And even from the very beginning, before they even picked out the first content chapters, I had students writing things like, I was listening. They all say, I was listening to that man. that man. I was watching the video of that man, and he was talking about how people are biased. And I thought to myself, yes, they are. They are so biased. And then I realized he was talking about me. This is an actual student this semester. And I thought, oh no, that is me. It was really the greatest post. I actually asked her if I could save it because I'm going to probably use it in a talk sometime. And she was excited about that. And so it was the moment, right? You know, when you have those moments, it was just a moment when you're like, this hit. That was a moment for her that it became not just us versus them. And that's an important distinction in social psychology, right? So that was really what I'm looking for. And then I developed a grading rubric, which you don't have to read all this, but I just want to show you that I make this really clear to students about how are you going to be graded for this? What am I looking for? I don't think this is perfect. I think I need to still work on it some. But really, what are the criteria? Right? And these are all the things that have been outlined in my description of the assignment. So they've identified a unique theme. They've connected it to the topic from the chapter. They have applied the concept to everyday life. So this makes grading so much easier for you. It makes it very clear to them as to what is involved. And so then when they get a particular score, it's easy to point to how they got that score. So I have this for their original posts. And then, of course, they have to do their 2 substantive responses. And so I have the grading rubric for their substantive responses as well, right? So really trying to, again, kind of model for them and teach them that, hey, that was a great idea isn't really considered a substantive response, right? So that's the kind of how you follow that up with assessment. And it really does make it much more clear for the students. It makes it easier for you to grade. So I think the thing to remember, what I should say is that that's kind of my way of bringing themes into my course. Because it's an online course, the content is there, the lecture videos are there, right? But they don't have as much interaction with me. When I'm face-to-face with students, then I can say, you know, here's how the themes are woven in. So this is my way of kind of doing this in an online course. And you can just make small changes bit by bit to your course this way. There are lots of resources available. So the Intro Psych Initiative has a website with APA where there's lots of different examples of how you can incorporate themes. There's some assessments on there. Steve Chu was part of making an important activity for student success. That's really great on there. So there's a lot of information there. The other plug that I would like to make is for the Intro Psych sessions. So Garth Neufeld and Eric Landrum lead that, and they have a whole series that they just released on Intro Psych. So if you're interested in that, you can go to PsychSessions.org and really listen to a variety of Intro Psych instructors and how they do their course and kind of helping Garth to redesign his course. So that's a great series. So here are our little working groups from when we went, and actually the one time we met in person over these 3 years. So the course models and design group, and then the woolly mammoths. So I want to thank you for being here, and I don't know that we have, well, we're out there exactly right on time. So I think we probably need to wrap up, but if you have any individual questions, Jane and I will be hanging out here, and we would be happy to talk with you.